Nobody'd pay a quarter to hear that critic sing. If you hung him from a good hook, couldn't even swing.
Yep.
They never pay the cover, they never buy the drink, but they hang around for hours just to tell you what they think. Yeah, I think that sums it up pretty well. But I will say this about quote unquote professional critics. There is a value, I think, to reviews when the writer adds something creative of their own into the mix. And the example I always give of this is a review I read of Thomas Dolby's track Hyperactive. Because this writer had described the trombone player as being at his own personal Mardi Gras, and
That's good.
I found the image of someone experiencing a personal Mardi Gras, quite amusing. And, that comment actually did enhance my enjoyment of the track. Because now, whenever I hear Hyperactive, when I hear the trombone come in just all crazy and wild, I will smile because I remember the little, creative input of that reviewer. And I also have to say, in terms of your music, I came across a little blurb that described it as being, quote, expertly produced and casually performed, unquote.
That's accurate.
Yeah, I thought it was a nice turn of phrase and fairly apt. I think that's in reference to your 1982 album, Old Songs for the New Depression.
Yeah, that's why I said you have to be careful about when you talk about criticism. I too really like the phrase somebody having their own personal Mardi Gras, because that adds color and context to what you hear. It would be totally different if the reviewer said that the trombone player was nowhere near as good as another trombone player. And so suddenly it's not about what the trombone player did, but what about he didn't do. And I so much criticism is negative because, quite frankly, it's easier to write negative criticism than it is to come up with a turn of phrase like somebody having their own personal Mardi Gras. So a lot of critics are lazy from the point of view that it's easier to appear to be insightful if you're negative. And that's just simply a fact.
That's true, and it's probably also true that a lot of the magazine industry is kind of dying, but I'm sure a lot of times they want the sensationalization. They rather have a troublemaking kind of thing because I think more people want to read about it. So they might try and pick a fight. The next thing I was going to say is that these happy little occasions, unfortunately, with critics are unfortunately few and far between because usually what you do see is just some completely unwarranted smear job. For some reason, these individuals feel empowered to rake artists over the coals. And I have to believe there's an element of jealousy involved because, you've accomplished something that they haven't, and they resent you for it and they feel the need to spread the poison. But, now with the advent of the internet, we're all reviewers in a sense. We can all let our thoughts be known. And sure, someone for a famous paper can write a review, but 5,000 civilians can write in and contradict that person. I don't know what show you were at, but we all loved it. What I'll say, what I always say is a sort of summation of my feelings about this is, I would rather be the world's worst artist than the world's best critic.
Yeah, well, that's where the line "nobody would pay a quarter to hear a critic sing" comes from. That's exactly the point.
Yeah, when somebody says, "Hey, this trombone player is good, this one's bad," that's the point where you walk up to him, give him a trombone, and say, "You play."
Yeah. Well, Phil Wood said that to me once. He was talking about how he was criticized early on in the early 50s for sounding like Charlie Parker. And he said, well, here, take my horn. You sound like Charlie Parker. Let's see how you do. I mean, the reviewer was talking about how, Charlie Parker was dominating Phil's style when he was a young man. But the fact is, to even consider trying to understand what Charlie Parker did was so far above most people's understanding of what's going on that it was ludicrous. But yet Phil, during his life, had to put up with a lot of that kind of criticism. That, oh, well, he sounded like Charlie Parker, which is awful. It's terrible.
That quote's come up on this show before. Exact incident, exact quote. I think the really criminal thing about Charlie Parker is there are a lot of recordings of him, but there's almost no film. There's a performance he did with Dizzy Gillespie and Dick Hyman, and a little bit of still photography and stuff. But it's like, I mean, even Clint Eastwood and I think Quincy Jones, they were hanging around these people with cameras, access to movie cameras. Well, it was a little bit early in Clint Eastwood's career, but I just mean this is like the sax player, and nobody thought to, film him. I think that's pretty criminal. But of course, we get to hear him. But
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, and what I said earlier about, I'd rather be the world's worst artist than the world's best critic. Interestingly, a lot of people believe I actually am the world's worst artist. So,
So you're halfway there.
there you go, man. The shoe fits. Well, next I want to play a track from your 1990 Cool Paradise album.
Yeah.
That one sort of had an Al Jarreau, Manhattan Transfer, Donald Fagen kind of vibe to it. There's a track on it that I found pretty intriguing lyrically. It's called "If Someone Has to Wreck Your Life." It's basically saying, you might need to endure. At least my interpretation is saying you might need to endure like a messy, failed relationship to get you where you truly need to be. And I'm volunteering to be that failed partner for you. That's kind of an unusual pitch. Mm-hmm. What's the story there?
Well, that song actually was written by a friend of mine named Pat McDonald. And Pat is the singer-songwriter who had a really big hit at one point with a song called "Future's So Bright I Gotta Wear Shades."
Oh, yeah.
And he's a brilliant songwriter, and that was one of his songs. And I think you got it exactly. That's what that song is about. If someone has to wreck your life, it might as well be a friend. Somebody has to burn your playhouse down. You can count on me is one of the lyrics. And he's just a brilliant writer. And that song really appealed to me because the idea of a brutal truth being the best thing you can do for a friend sometimes, you don't hear songs written about that very often. And Pat was just gifted. So that's the origin of that song.
Yeah, and as a guy who listens to a lot of music, I always appreciate it when I do hear an angle that no one's covered before, because I never really want to sit down and write the boy meets girl scenario that you hear all the time.
Right.
You always want some kind of twist or something unique. So let's listen to that from Cool Paradise. This is "If Someone Has to Wreck Your Life."
If someone has to wreck your life for you to be set free, if someone has to rearrange your world from A to Z, if someone has to pick the flower to plant the apple tree, if someone has to wreck your life, you can call on me. You can call on me. If someone has to be the one to set you on your way, to rudely disconnect you from the games you love to play, if someone has to set the fire, burn your playhouse down, if someone has to wreck your life, I'll be around. I will be around. has to seed the clouds that rain on your parade, if someone has to shout out loud and drown this serenade, if someone has to change the tune or bring it to an end, if someone has to set you free, might as well be a friend. If someone has to wreck your life, might as well be a friend.
You know, there's a movie that starred Ethan Hawke and Julie Delpy, where he's an American traveling in Europe, and he meets this French girl, and the pitch he uses, the line he uses, you know, they're talking on the train, and you know, they're kind of getting along, but he knows when he gets off in Vienna, she's going to go on, and they're never going to see each other again. And so he's like, I guess this must have been in the 90s before everybody had, you know, smartphones and texting and everything. So, so what he tells her is, he goes, look, you know, I know this sounds crazy. Why don't you just get off the train with me here, you know, and just like hang out until I got to catch my flight. You know, we could just talk, and then you can catch a later train to go see your grandmother or whatever. But he says the reasoning he uses, you know, is he says, you know, because, you know, if we don't do that, you're just going to wonder, like, if I was Mr. Right or if I was the right guy, and, you know, you might have doubts and regrets. He says, but, you know, if you spend a bunch of time with me and get to know me, you realize I'm just another jerk. I'm just another asshole. Just, you know, you're not missing anything. And, you know, this is the tact he takes, and it actually works.
He's doing her a favor. I like it.
Exactly. Yeah, I'm going to help you out here, and I'm just going to put your mind. I'm not thinking about myself at all, hot chick.
Yeah.
Well, another thing I have to say about that recording is, you know, the artist it most reminds me of is Leo Sidran. I mean, I could easily imagine him singing that song.
Yeah, I could too. Well, Leo is a beautiful singer. He worked on it when he was young, and he's done a lot of really precise and high-end studio work. So his singing, I kind of stumbled along and discovered a singing style, but Leo's singing style is really authentic and legitimate, and I could definitely hear him sing that.
Yeah, I think stylistically it's right in his wheelhouse.
Yep.
And speaking of Leo, let's bring it current to your latest release, which he plays the drums on. The name of your latest album is Picture Him Happy, which is a reference to a mythical character famous for an exercise in futility. Before you explain the title and the album concept, I want to mention that you and Leo were in Paris performing in a club the night of the terror attacks, in which over 100 people were tragically killed and over 300 were seriously wounded. In the immediate aftermath, you and Leo recorded your thoughts and impressions about that harrowing event, and he released it as episode 43 of his podcast. So to what extent did that experience inform and contextualize this latest recording?
Well, first of all, Leo's the Third Story podcast that he does is, I mean, I listen to him as a fan. I really do. And I've learned a lot about him by listening to that. And that might sound curious given the fact that I'm his father, but it's the fact. You know, you learn a lot about people when you hear what they're interested in and how they come to an experience. That night in Paris, what was particularly interesting in retrospect is how we both came to that experience differently. We were playing in a club about a mile away from where the attacks were, and in between the first set and the second set, news spread kind of like wildfire that there had been this terrorist attack, and everything was shut down, and people were immediately leaving wherever they were and trying to get home. And all you heard everywhere were sirens, and it became like a very, very dramatic thing. And people didn't know what was going on. We didn't know, of course, and there was fear that whatever the cause of the terror attacks, because there had been nightclubs involved, that the fact that we were in a nightclub was maybe dangerous, and should we stay in the club or should we leave? Some people wanted to just close the door and hide in the club, and I said to Leo at one point, I said, I don't feel afraid. I'm here with you, and if something were to happen, if this is the last day we spend together, this is not a bad way for me to go. And he said, well, I don't feel that way, and I don't want to go at all. I'm getting out of here. And I thought, that's really interesting. That really shows me my perspective. Not only is it my perspective, but it's shaped by my age and my experience. And you can't really project your feelings onto anybody else, even though you may know them very, very well. So that kind of an ironic distance from experience, I think, is part of the records that we made together over the last 5 or 6 years. Leo and I made 4 records. The most recent is the Picture I'm Happy. But before that, we did one called Dylan Different, which was Bob Dylan songs. Then we did one called Don't Cry for No Hipster. And then we did one called Blue Camus. And now this one, Picture I'm Happy. And all 4 of those records have this kind of very relaxed, very focused, very clean Brooklyn hipster vibe to them. And it's because I've kind of surrendered the job of production to Leo. I started in 1971 making my own records, and I produced them all myself. I mean, I was the producer as well as the artist. And there were good reasons to do it, and we had some good results. But I found that giving it over to Leo made a wonderful transition for me. And I liked the records that we made together, frankly, much more than I liked the records that I made as the producer. This particular record is based on Picture I'm Happy. It's based on the myth of Sisyphus, with the French philosopher Albert Camus' essay, where he talks about, obviously, the myth of Sisyphus, of this mythical man who's doomed to push this rock up the hill forever. And every time he gets right near the top, the rock rolls back to the bottom, and he has to do it over again. And he never gets to the top. And in that essay, Camus says, the only way you can see Sisyphus as defeating a cruel fate is to imagine that he's happy. Even though he never gets to the top, imagine he's happy. And that's where the phrase Picture I'm Happy came from. That life for all of us is like that. We never get to accomplish all the things we want to accomplish. And maybe none of the things we want to accomplish come out the way we hope they would. But if you go about the process of your life and your work, happy to have the opportunity to do it, well, then you defeat the absurdity of life. So that's the premise of the song Picture I'm Happy and the album Picture I'm Happy.
Yeah, and the reason I asked about the French incident is you could also imagine, in the face of something that terrible, do you choose to be happy or do you choose to be depressed? You know what I mean, about adjusting your own attitude? And since the incident happened prior to the album, I was just wondering if there was a correlation between that. It sounds like there might not be.
Well, there wasn't a direct correlation, but I have to say, the last 18 months have been, and Picture I'm Happy, those songs were written starting 18 months ago. So the last 18 months were really the test, not the Paris attacks, but the politics in the United States. How do you face 8 years of Obama's very cool intellectual style, and then have to face this politics of anger and disappointment and resentment? That's really what's behind Picture I'm Happy.
Well, all the tracks on the album are great, both musically and lyrically. But the one I wanted to play for the listeners' first exposure to that album is Big Brother.
Oh, yeah. Big Brother was written by Mose Allison. It was one of the very first songs he ever wrote. He told me about it. He had never recorded it. He wrote it in the early 50s. And we were talking, and he played it for me. And I was producing a record for him, and I insisted that we record it on his album. And then subsequently, it was recorded once more by Georgie Fame when I was producing Georgie. And this is the third recording of the song. It's only been recorded 3 times. But it's a classic Mose Allison composition, and it was written almost 70 years ago, if you can imagine.
Wow.
And it's every bit as new today as when he wrote it.
Yeah, well observed, and that's kind of surprising and kind of sad. And when was 1984 actually written? Was it in the 20s or?
Yeah, well, it's
the 30s?
yeah, exactly. It's very similar, and I think when Mose wrote it, it was in response to the McCarthy House Un-American Activities Committee hearings. If you remember that, in the early 50s, it was a horrible time where you could imagine that you were being spied on wherever you went, and I think that's what he was referring to.
Yeah, and then because it's such having the government watching you, it's such a relatable concept. It does travel from the McCarthy hearings to cameras on street corners to people tapping your phone and looking into your computer and all that. Well, one thing that your version has that the other two doesn't have is Will Lee playing the bass.
Yeah, that's true. I had that advantage. Yeah, Will was great. Will was great on these sessions, and the combination of Will on bass and Leo on drums was just killer. Their time concept is so relaxed and so funky. That was a little magical experience. And when the sessions were over, Will actually said to Leo that, Leo, man, you're one of my favorite drummers. They got along great.
Yeah, I saw photos of all three of you guys doing those sessions via Leo. And Leo, as I mentioned, he's the drummer on this one. Will Lee's on the bass, and the whole album. And as you mentioned, the previous three, there's just like the guy said, expertly produced and casually performed. Hey, what do you know? A critic actually benefited this podcast.
Well, I don't know if it's I have a feeling that a critic is somebody with an axe to grind, and a reviewer is somebody with a context to bring. And so I would like to say that guy was a reviewer, not a critic.
I appreciate the distinction. I think that's a pretty good way to look at it. But we've talked a lot about this, so let's let the listeners enjoy it. From 2017's Picture Him Happy, here comes Big Brother.
Let me give you some good advice. Don't get caught in the same trap twice. Every little thing you do, Big Brother, he's watching you. Don't put your business on the telephone. And don't go out and get too well known. See, it could be your Waterloo. Big Brother, he's watching you. somebody that you're having fun. Take it easy, walk, don't run. Be careful who you're talking to. Big brother, he's watching you. Don't say nothing about a CEO. When the money whistles, do-si-do. I only tell you 'cause it's true. Big brother, he's watching you. You see every little thing you do. Big brother, he's watching you. Be careful who you're talking to. Big brother, he's watching you.